Thank you everyone for allowing us to provide an update on this working group clinical trials. I am one of the co-leads. Jen Lin is my other colleague who's co-leading this working group. I wanted to provide a quick update on what we're doing, what we're about, and essentially where we're heading. So high level, this working group is focused around using clinical research data that is in the CDISC SDTM format, which is a specific data standard that's used in clinical research due to its requirement for regulatory use, for example, the US FDA. Our intent is twofold. One is to figure out how to do the mappings and be able to facilitate that. And two, to tap into the wealth of clinical research data that's in SDTM format and use that for observational purposes or other translational research capabilities that could be beneficial to the industry. Our objectives, I won't go through all the wording here, just to streamline this. We have 8 main topics that we're trying to tackle as part of this process. You can see those at the bottom. We have actually fulfilled 1 through 5 of those or 6 of those topics. We are stuck on the last 2, and I'll get to the reason why we're stuck on the last 2 shortly. But we are using as our initial base synthetic data that was produced out of the FUSE organization as a starting point, as that SDTM data source was readily available publicly, and it was a great way to kind of kickstart the working group and get some work done. Our goal again is to leverage clinical research data as SDTM and be able to facilitate. You will see a bidirectionality there because we did come across a use case where actual OMOP data sets needed to be converted back to SDTM for submission purposes. That is a additional scope to this, but our primary scope is to go directly from CDISC SDTM to OHDSI OMOP CDM. And really, again, the goal is to analyze that data and add it onto other existing real world data that exists out there, such as EHRs, et cetera. The main differences, I should say semantic or even syntactic based, is the terminology. The terminology within CDISC SDTM is not what would be ubiquitous to what you see out there in general healthcare. For example, Loink and Snowman and ICD are quite widely used outside of clinical research. Within clinical research itself, for at least CDISC SDTM, it's a little bit more tightly knit around CDISC specific control terminology, as well as dictionaries such as MEDRA for adverse events and things like that. Our existing activities have been first to come up with those topics, as I mentioned, get our conceptual thoughts on paper, and see how we could actually go ahead and do these mappings. And from those mappings, we started to translate, okay, well, where would certain variables actually correlate to in CDM, and how would that actually be used for operational purposes? And I'll just preface this and say we're not trying to get to 100% here. Our goal is to really start with a baseline, a foundation, so that others in industry can work off of as a basis. From that, the team has worked on creating the necessary pseudocode to be able to actually create the code to execute some of this. Again, our starting point is very minimal with the synthetic data that I mentioned earlier. So we're getting to a point of accessing more data, and I'll get to that shortly. Again, the mappings seem very easy from the top level, but once you get down to the actual value level information, you start noticing, again, based on terminology, differences in the way they're treated between SDTM and OMOP can create a lot of complexity, as one would expect. So again, it's far more complex than one would otherwise assume. Next steps. So as the bottom boilerplate there says, we need data. So what are we doing? We're actually working with Vivly and CPATH to access their platform, which they have a wealth of SDTM data sources from a real world perspective. And I think that's very conducive to what we need to do in order for us to kind of keep the momentum going and get to the next steps and finalize those topics. Again, the mapping activities, we're going to identify gaps and limitations, and really come up with some best practices and strategies to work around some of the things that we're seeing with the mapping process. At the end of the day, the goal is to create something for industry, and that's a multitude of things. One is have a data set that has both the SCTM to OMOM, so you can see how that would work and make that available for people to use and be able to use as a reference. And then we'll have generalized mappings. I don't think we're going to get to explicit mappings in sense because the high variance of what exists in clinical research, but we can at least get to a point, again, that 60/40 or 80/20 approach that you can come up with. And within that, we need to provide some disclaimers and tips because not everything is treated the same way as you come across it, and really have that guidance documentation that goes with all of that to have one cohesive package that, again, the community can use. Really, with that, nice and short to the point. If you'd like to join us, we do have calls on Fridays, bi-weekly, and we're glad to get others on board to be able to help support this, especially on the technical side with the mappings. If you have OMOP experience or SCTM experience, by all means, we welcome you to join us. So I'll stop there.